Good morning, all of you. My name is Bhatia, and this is a class of BHIE 141. Earlier, we have done Unit 3rd and Unit 4, where we have talked about the history of China. And in this Unit 5, we are going to start Boxer, who was spreading Christianity, their religion, and the Chinese government was not ready to do all these things because earlier the Chinese government was Confucius thinking, and they were belonging that and they were following that. And after that, Confucius, they were um, they were spreading the religion of Buddha, and they were following the and in this Unit 5 in Boxer Rebellion, and we are going to although this movement's first targets were missionaries who preached Christianity, the real aim was to fight imperialism. This violent, dramatic, and earth shaking movement was the result of both the enslavement of Chinese nation by foreign powers and also the deteriorating social economic conditions, which reforms at the political level could not prevent. As if Western imperialist encroachment on China was not enough, Japanese imperialism too emerged as a new force to crush China further. The ruling Manchu and Chiang dynasty had weakened considerably on all fronts due to its own internal conditions as well as imperialist domination of China. And next, we are going to start about socio-economic conditions in China. How was the social and economic condition in China that was prevalent in India, that was prevalent in China, and we are going to discuss the socio-economic conditions in the late 19th century China. During this period, an increase in population led to an increase in the number of unemployed among educated or the literate. Unemployed. Competition for official jobs grew as now there were more claimants to decreasing resources. The King government did not adequately expand the administrative structure to make it commensurate with the growth of population and commerce. Failure of the institutional structure of the government to grow meant that upward mobility of young literate was hampered. Job competition and frustration brought about all level of corrupt practices, just like bribery, just like nepotism and favoritism, which in turn adversely affected the procedure of administration. This also meant the erosion in the prominence of Confucian principle. Personal cliques and patronage networks emerged, which adversely affected the examination system, taxation, and administration of justice. The peasant was further crushed. Provincial officials, whose primary task was to take tax from cultivators, based on a quota assigned to them and keep some surplus for themselves, became unmerciful towards the common folk. The demand on these officials from the central treasury was high as the betting government struggled to maintain an army, a body of court officials, and pompous ceremonies. Next, we are going to discuss about imperialism. How they were not believing in imperialism. Why? The military defeat of China in the Opium Wars and the unequal treaty system had made China almost a semi colony of Western powers. The imperialists justified their actions shamelessly in the name of modernization. For example, England claimed that this act of theirs brought China into the family of nations and make it enter international trade on terms of equality. But external interference in China jeopardized the emperor's status. People were dismayed and shocked to see the powerlessness of the son of heaven, which the emperor was believed to be. Western intrusion into China, among other things, introduced Chinese Christian missionaries in large numbers and created a class of middlemen known as compradors to carry on business with the Chinese. Both these factors were eventually to have major bearings on the country in later years. To be able to successfully handle the challenges posed by both the foreign powers and deteriorating social economic conditions, the King Court did make an attempt to modernize the system through reforms. Towards the end of the 19th century, world capitalism monopolistic stage. That is the stage of imperialism. In such a stage, in the words of Lenin, what he was saying, the export of capital as distinguished from the export of commodities, territorial division of the world became extremely keen. China was the victim of this monopolistic stage. China's defeat at the hands of Japan in 1895, along with the conclusion of the Treaty of Shimonoseki, another unequal treaty, made another imperialist entry in the China. The Treaty of Shimonoseki also included the provision of Japan's occupation of big slice of Chinese territory, the Liaodong Peninsula and the Taiwan. This also began the process of inter-imperialist scramble for Chinese territory. At one point, the partition of China seemed almost imminent. Between 1896 to 98, most of China was carved into spheres of influence of different imperialist powers. For example, Russia got the areas north of Great Wall, and next the Yangtze Valley went to Britain, and next Shandong to Germany, and next Fujian to Japan, and Guangdong, Guangxi, and greater parts of Yunnan to France. In large numbers of foreign missionaries came to China. The official Chinese historians have termed them as those who were the clock of religion but actually served imperialist aggression. They had been coming into China several years before the Sino Japanese War. Their activities including building of church, preaching the gospel, sometimes clashing with the local populace. These were the activities they were doing in China. The Boxer Uprising had a definite anti Christian or anti missionaries stance, and therefore, debates in academic circles have tried to sort out whether the uprising was primarily anti foreign or anti missionary. The Chinese interpretation is that it was anti imperialist in the first place, and secondly, it was also anti Manchu. In all probabilities, because the missionaries happened to be foreigners, they were the first targets of uprising. The masses and peasants were blatantly hostile to Christianity for the significant reason that Christianity was the symbol of all that was foreign. For the Boxers, the foreign missionaries were primary devils and their native Chinese converts the secondary devils. Hence, both needed to be liquidated. Next, Yetuan. Since a long time, secret societies have existed in China. They have organized the downtrodden to become rebels against many established order. Whenever suffering and misery reached intolerable level, people often took to banditry and secret society membership. There have been instances of secret society leaders organizing a successful rebellion against a dynasty and setting up their own dynastic rule. The Boxers or Yehetuan are believed to have originated in the White Lotus sect, a group of secret societies. Lotus sect means a group of secret societies which claimed to be descended from Ming emperors who ruled China before the king took over in 1644 AD. Next, why Shandong? The outbreak of violence in Shandong province, where the uprising took strong roots, in no accident. Shandong had to bear the brunt of the imperialist encroachments. During the Sino Japanese War, the invading armies of Japan attacked the Shandong Peninsula and for 3 years occupied this region, threatening not to withdraw until the indemnity imposed was paid in full. Two of Shandong's big ports came under the control of Germany. Germany had also marked off the entire province as her sphere of influence. The introduction of coastal navigation and railways by the imperialists adversely affected employment patterns. Many boatmen, porters, peddlers, and small traders were rendered jobless. This added to the overall deteriorating socio-economic condition. By the end of 19th century, a network of churches had spread all over China. Shandong alone had over 1,000 churches and about 80,000 missionaries and Christian converts. According to the official history of China, written after communist takeover, the missionaries were used as tools of aggression against the Chinese people. As one account says, many of the missionaries, directed by their archbishops, bishops, other high ups collected intelligence and forcibly seized farmland, put pressure on the low courts, extorted money from the people, bought over gangsters and other bad elements to become converts, created incidents, bullied Chinese common folk, and committed crimes including murder. Like a plague, they brought limitless distress among the Chinese people. The king officials, high and low, cowered before imperialist tyranny. They invariably reached to disputes between the people, the missionaries, by shielding the latter and oppressing the former, leaving them without recourse. Next, the uprising. Popular struggles against foreign churches took place in Shandong in 1896, led by a secret society called Da Dao Hui, means Big Sword Society. They have made secret society in 1897 and 1898. Two such struggles broke out. The Yetuan movement soon engulfed Shandong and spread elsewhere. The membership of this organization comprised peasants, handicraft, urban, poor, unemployed wage laborers. It never had a central organ. The basic unit was the Dao and shrine and consisted of young men, teenage boys, and many women. Strict discipline was observed by both leaders as well as the rank and file who held the organization together. Each boxer squad was formed of 10 fighters, 10 squads made up a bridge. In the winter of 1899-1900, the Boxers, in order to oppose imperialism, attacked the missionaries and churches in Shandong. The foreigners stationed in Beijing, fearing the escalation of movement, pressed the Qing government to crush it. Yuxian, the reigning governor of Shandong, was removed, and in his place came Yuan Shikai, whose new army was emerging as a powerful political force. Yuan was a favorite of imperialists. In order to crush the uprising, he enacted a proclamation to ban the Yetuan. As a part of his suppression campaign, he also ordered the troops to shoot anyone linked to boxers and assured them full protection if they did so. The Yetuan fought bravely and absolutely against Yuan's army while maintaining their anti-imperialist activities. Yuan strengthened his army, adding new battalions to it. He also sought the help of German troops, other armed forces which were raised by the imperialists to massacre the Yetuan. The latter suffered serious setback. In the spring of 1900, the Boxers in large numbers left Shandong and moved to neighboring Zili in the vicinity of Peking. Most of their activities henceforth took place in this area, but the influence was even felt in Shanxi, Inner Mongolia, Hunan, and also the northeastern province of China. The poster campaign brought many adherents to the movement. Their posters reflected the people's anti imperialist sentiments, their disgust with the ruling dynasty, who they believed collaborated with foreigners to repress their own people. One popular poster reads as follows. What the poster was saying: most bitterly do we hate the treaties which harm the country and bring calamities on the people. High officials betray the nation, lower ranks follow suit. The people find no redress for their grievances. Means the people were not happy with the behavior of that type of government and those type of movements. In early June 1900, Peking was filled with Yetuan posters. Its members began to enter the city day by day as well as by night. Even guards at the city gate did not stop there, these either out of shared sentiments or out of fear. Wearing red turbans, red bordered shoes, and socks, the boxers paraded on the streets of capital and swords and spears. In a short span of time, more than 800 shrines were set up in Beijing, and they stayed in the homes of loyalty and nobility spread all over the city and assaulted foreigners. The latter, in a helpless state, huddled in the legation quarters or in the cathedrals with armed protection. The Boxers held their demonstrations mostly in the night, and they urged people not to buy foreign articles and carry on their introductory and other activities. Simultaneously, similar struggles were ignited and carried out in Tianjin. Here, the movement had started in the form of poster destruction, setting up shrines, and military training. By mid 1900, they manufactured their own swords, their own spears. Along with burning down churches, they broke electricity poles and wrecked the office of the customs. And in 2 to 3 months, the Boxer uprising engulfed the entire Beijing, Tianjin areas. Its anti imperialist orientation was indicated by the fact that they took the churches, they took the railway power lines, and steamers and foreign goods as the immediate targets of their pent up hatred. In the summer of 1900, Peking and Taizé were virtually, despite the open anti Manchu standpoint of boxers and efforts made by Yuan Shikai and other military mandarins to suppress them. The Dowager Empress Sixi took an ambiguous stand. A court edict said that all rebels were not to be considered bandits. Another one said that the organization members acted to the ancient principle of keeping mutual watch and giving mutual help. This as a go ahead signal. Foreign officials also believed that many senior court officials and some governors secretly encouraged the seditious secret society. Five foreign envoys Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and US. They also demanded that the Chinese government declare the Yetuan a criminal organization, thereby repudiating the court's own standpoint on the Boxer uprising. By May, the foreign powers began preparing their troops for an armed confrontation with the Boxers. Eight powers, that is Britain, France, Germany, Austria, Italy, Japan, US, and Russia, formed a joint command. Remaining in China was a common interest of all, and for the time being, they gave up their difference to strike a blow on Chinese imperialism, Chinese nationalism. The Foreign Office called for the powers not to advance their reinforcement. The Imperial Council scheduled a meeting on June 16 to discuss the situation arising out of eight powers armed intervention. One side, eight powers, and one side, China. The meeting showed differing perception of nobility and senior court officials on Boxer movement. There was clearly a pro boxer and anti boxer division, pro boxer and anti boxer. The foreign powers were determined to carry out an armed suppression, and so the court, through an imperial edict, declared war on June 21, 1900. The diplomatic community was asked to leave Peking in 24 hours, which were later extended. On the expiration of the set time limit, Chinese troops opened fire on the legations. With direct support from the sizable section of Chinese ruling class and a passive opposition from another. The eight nation called Allied Army, thoroughly indulged in looting, terrorized the surrounding areas, and indulged in a violent suppression of the Boxer uprising. Their warships sprawled, and the Yangtze River and gunboats frequented the Chinese harbors. They befriended the landlords and gentry, who saw in the imperialist forces their guarantee of security. In July August 1900, Fierce fighting took place, which caused death and destruction on both sides. Now, what was the British protocol? The Allied power inability to came to an understanding on how to divide China among themselves prevented its partition. Rivalry among the powers had taken an acute form. But after a great deal of international wrangling, a joint note was presented to China in December 1900. Discussions began soon after negotiations dragged on for several months and only in September 1901. The final agreements were signed. The Boxer Protocol of 7 September 1901 consisted of 12 articles. 12 articles, they were as follows. What were the 12 articles? Number one, a member of Chinese royal family was to proceed to Berlin to convey to the German emperor the regrets of Chinese emperor and the Grand Council for the murder of German minister Baron von Kettler. Next, suspension of civil service examinations in all cities where foreigners were murdered and maltreated. Next, Vice President of China's Board of Revenue was to proceed to Japan to express the Chinese emperor and government's regrets for the murder of the Japanese legation chancellor. Next, for 5 years, arms and ammunitions could not be imported. Next, the legation quarter in Peking was to be reserved for the exclusive resistance of foreigners. Next, Dadu and other forts, which impeded free communication between Peking and the sea, were to be razed. Next, certain specified centers were to be occupied by the powers. These type of things they were calling that. And next is the Zhongli Yaman was to be reformed and upgraded as a Ministry of Foreign Affairs with precedence over six other ministers. Indemnity of 333 million US dollars were to be paid over a period of 40 years. These changes they have done in that. Next is academic debate. Yes, scholars have used a variety of sources to understand the real nature of Boxer uprising, its impact, and the response it evoked. They include official publications of the foreign powers involved in China, missionary documents, missionary writings, manuscripts of historians, other scholars in that period living in China, the publication documents of Chinese government. These were the sources to know about the academic area of the Chinese government. All these put together provide a great deal of information, and there is an ongoing debate about its nature. Next, the conclusion of this unit 5 is we have studied about the Boxers, we have studied about giant Chinese government, Manchu government, imperialism, and we have studied about Christianism and Christian missionaries by which they were following, they were spreading their religion in China, and they have made a lot of churches over there. The Boxer Uprising was a major peasant upheaval in the series of peasant revolts that had occurred periodically in Chinese history. This was a patriotic outburst of North China, accompanied by outbreaks in many other parts, which signaled the birth of Chinese nationalism. And it was directed first against Christian missionaries and converted, and eventually a war was waged against the whole imperialist establishment. It was a result of impoverishment, suffering, untold miseries, mercilessness of the system. The Manchu government's failure to satisfy the needs of the masses and its official and ruthlessness of dealing with its subjects alienated the people. These were the things we have studied in Unit 5 in the Boxer Rebellion. And next, in Unit 6, we will study about self strengthening movement and the 100 Days reforms, how they strengthen their movement by their self and how they reform with the 100 days. They have an idea about the self strengthening movement and how it helped in securing the state, became familiar with the restoration of agrarian system of the state, and able to learn how the Tongzi rulers made efforts to re-establish the civil authority and administration, become familiar with the second phase of self-strengthening movement, and they learn about the results of restoration, self-strengthening movements, and get an idea of 100 days reform and its scope and the reasons for its failure. We will study these things. And in introduction, we can say the 19th century was a significant period in the history of modern China. How, with the advance of imperialist powers and developing internal crisis, the king state and society embarked on a program of reform, which during the course of 19th century was to extend beyond what was originally proposed in the form of Tongzi restoration of 1860s and 1870s and its corollary, the self strengthening movement. The respite provided by the brief conciliatory policy followed by Western powers after the signing of the Treaty of Tianjin in 1858 gave the King state the space to tackle the Taipings and to consider the problems posed by the foreigners and rebellious peasants. Now, how they started their self strengthening movement. In the mid 19th century, the King state, having withstood challenges from the internal crisis generated by Taipings and European onslaughts of the two Opium Wars, embarked upon the program of reform and strengthening the state. This period referred to as a Tongzi restoration and two major policy components. Tongzi was the rank title of emperor who ascended the Chinese throne in November 1861. Tongzi's reign extended from 1861 to 1874. And the two aspects of the policy were they were following the policy, the were restoration of king power. Number one, restoration of king power, how they restore their king power. This was a cardinal theme of restoring the power and glory of the state and by implication of Confucian society. The idea of restoration was not anything new. There were, in fact, several such restorations attempts in Chinese history, which in the interim provided a renewal of faith and commitment in the dynasty and the traditional order. Self strengthening, this entailed a limited modernization policy concerned initially with the creation of an armaments industry. However, during the 1870s, the 1880s, modernization was extended in area of industry, communications, most importantly to education. Architects of restoration and self-strengthening. Architects of restoration and self-strengthening. The principal architects of these programs were Prince Kung, the brother of late Zhang Feng, emperor, and Wen Jiang was the chairman of Ministry of Public Works and the Ministry of Civil Works. Very odd name you are listening in this history of China because we are taking the names of Chinese people. That's why you will feel very odd after listening the names. At the provincial level, they were fortunate to have some outstanding bureaucrats who built the program. The most prominent of them was Zhang Dofan. Zhang Dofan, who in 1860, as the imperial commissioner, was instrumental in helping the state to quell the Taipings. Zhuo Zongtang, another official who had come to limelight in the wake of anti-Taiping maneuvers, and they played a critical role in the establishment of modern enterprises and in restoring the agrarian economy. One of the principal figures of restoration was Li Hongzhang, who during the last half of 19th century played an important role in China's relation with the Western power. These officials were supported by a host of provincial leaders and officials and all products of examination system. They were products of Confucian education and committed to preserve the social order and Confucian conception of the state. Next is restoration of agrarian economy. How they restore their agrarian economy. Restoration of agrarian economy became the principal concern at this time. Limitations were placed on government spending and, more importantly, on the material aspiration of peasantry. The idea was neither to increase national wealth nor production. A balance was sought to be struck between state finances and people livelihood and thereby to re-emphasize the principles of Confucian political economy. The program had three major thrusts. Number one, extension of cultivated areas, expansion of public works. These were the programs which they were following in the major thrust. They extend their cultivated areas and they expand their public works and they reduct of land tax. Let us briefly discuss each one of them. Number one, extension of cultivated areas. In the wake of political disturbances of the first half of the 19th century, much land lay abandoned because of the migration of rural population. Rural population migration, that's why they wake the political disturbances of first half. And as political strife ended, efforts were made to repopulate areas like Hunan, where demobilized soldiers were given plots of land. Peasants were encouraged to migrate to more prosperous and irrigated regions. For instance, in Xinjiang, in Jiangxi province, the population increased from 8,000 to 40,000 in a period of just 6 months. Although some of the repopulation was spontaneous, king officials encouraged it through Homestead Act, and agricultural resettlement offices were re-established to encourage group organization and to distribute seed, grain, and tools. Next is reconstruction of public works. How they reconstruct their public work? In an effort to fight famines, reserve granaries were repaired and additional granaries created with the help of gentry. The most urgent task, however, remained the waterworks. Dikes and canals had been badly neglected in Zili, Shandong, Zhengxi, and Sichuan. Vast enterprises were launched to repair hydraulic works and recover flooded lands. Though it has or reorganized, recognized that the major threat to the agrarian stability of North China plain was the vagaries of Yellow River. Attempts to control it remained at the planning stage only. Next is the reduction of taxes, how they reduct their taxes. A principal target of popular movement had been the tax abuses. It is estimated that during the Tongzi rule, land taxes were cut by some 30%. An important step was the permanent reduction of land tax. In the more affected areas like Jiangsu, as in the case of all the other reforms, the benefits of tax reforms did not reach the peasants. As usual, this was because the rise in the price of silver cancel out any benefit that they may have enjoyed. Next, the land registers were not drawn up, nor the new tariff published. Hence, local magistrates and gentry continued to collect taxes at the old rates. And the third one is the proposed reduction in the land tax was not accompanied by the reduction in the rent. Next is restoration of state and civil authority. Besides the agrarian and economic rejuvenation, the Tonzi restoration focused on the re-establishment of state authority and administration, which had been seriously undermined during the first half of 19th century. Substantial attempts were made to improve the bureaucracy with an emphasis on recruiting men of talent. As in the past, examination was stressed upon as the only road to power and prestige. Attempts were made to curtail the sale of degrees and the offices, which during the preceding decades had reached alarming proportions, a process which was perceived as contributing in the general morale of civil administration. New diplomacy towards the west. Despite the defeat of two opium wars, most Chinese officials and the gentry believed that barbarians could be driven back. A few leaders mentioned earlier, however, like Prince Dong, Wen Jiang, Li Hongzhang, and others, they recognizing the gravity of foreign aggression and they felt it necessary to evolve new institutions to contain foreign encroachments. Hence, on January 20, 1861, the Zhongli Yamen, one of controlling the superintendents of foreign trade in the various ports of relation with the Western. Here, it would be pertinent to mention the translation of Wheaton's work, Elements of International Law, into Chinese by an American missionary, Wab Martin, in 1864. Next is how they strengthen their self by themselves. Restoration, the official policy from diplomacy to industrial machinery. The first expression of this policy was the creation of an armaments industry. Following this was the development of mines, communications, textile industry, all of which were covered with the new objectives of 1870s onwards of acquiring wealth and power. This had first been advocated for the reasons of domestic policy, just like to ensure the imperial militia ability to suppress popular movements. Next is to resist the foreigners. Given the military humiliation that China had faced, the modernization of military was given initial priority. The two major aspects of military modernization were to reorganize the king armies, to reinforce loyalty to the state of rapidly growing regional armies, make China military equal in arms, in armaments of the West. This recognition of the need of modern weapons and their manufacture in China led to the establishment between 1865 to 1867 of four major arsenals. Next, we are going to start the during 1870s arms manufacture seemed unimportant once the great popular uprising had been suppressed. Soon, the second phase of the self strengthening movement was launched. Li Hongzhang and others intended to draw on the wealth and competence of merchants to set up new enterprises. They aimed to make China rise to wealth and power, as Li Hongzhang wrote in 1872. Li applied the term government supervision and merchant operation to all the new enterprises that were started. As part of this policy, the China Merchant Steam Navigation Company was launched in 1872. China Merchants Steam Navigation Company, 1872. And it was in the textile industry that there was some competition between official and private enterprise. The Shanghai cotton cloth mill started in the late 1880s and went into production in 1890s. The wealth and power policy led to two major innovations in the fields of communication like railways and like postal system. In 1863, 27 foreign firms gave a proposal to construct a railway between Shanghai and Suzhou, which was rejected as part of an effort to prevent further foreign encroachment. This position changed with the favoring of limited modernization. And in 1881, the first Chinese railway, 11 kilometers in length, was commissioned to haul coal and Kaiping Mining Company. In 1870 to 71, foreign companies installed telegraph lines linking Hong Kong, Shanghai, and Vladivostok. The introduction of national postal services met with opposition from the officials, the foreigners, and the banks and the companies which had a vested interest in a private postal system. Beginnings of modern education. They started railway, they started telegraph, now they are going to start modern education. It is significant that some of the beneficiaries of this education abroad, like Yan Fu, played an important part in Chinese intellectual and political life at the end of this century. This policy of officially sponsoring overseas education was given up by 1881. This happened partly due to the exclusion policy of United States, whereby the US unilaterally suspended Chinese and other Asian immigration in the wake of a strong anti-Chinese movement in California. During the last decades of 19th century, however, several young Chinese were to seek education abroad. They wanted to have education in abroad. Opposition to the innovations. There was sustained opposition to the self strengthening movement in official circles for the beginning. They were facing opposition, yes, and there was sustained opposition to the self strengthening movement in official circles from the beginning. The most prominent of critics was Wu Zhen, a Manchu official who held important positions as tutor of the emperor and the chairman of the Hanlin Academy. Using Confucian text, Wu Zhen tried to argue that science and technology would not resolve the problems of the state. Science and technology would not resolve the problems of the state. They were saying like this. Who? Wu Zhen. They were arguing. And what was the result? The major results of restoration and the self strengthening movements were number one, the restoration reinforced the political and social role of gentry. Next, since the state had drawn on military forces created by provincial gentry to quell the Taipings and other popular uprisings of 19th century. Next, historians agree that the state-sponsored enterprises illustrate the rise of modern capitalism in China. Next, new intellectual and literary trends in the form of translations and publications widen the horizons of Chinese intellectuals. Increasingly, Chinese scholars were becoming aware that Western knowledge, the base of Western riches and power, was more than mere technology. The 1898 reform movement, China's defeat by Japan, was irrefutable proof of the failure of self-strengthening movement. In this background of expanding foreign interest and what was sometimes been picturesquely called as the cutting up of Chinese melon, there was a revival of demands for further reforms in a period of intense political unrest. There were violent reactions to the terms of the Treaty of Shimonoseki. The terms were entirely in favor of Japan. China renounced suzerainty over Korea and ceded Taiwan. Kang Yue, Kang Yue, a scholar from Guangdong, who was in Peking to wrote the Metropolitan Examination and penned a 10,000 long character memorial to the Kangxi Emperor. This memorial was signed by 1,300 examination graduates who were also in Peking to take the examination. A remarkable document. It had several important demands, and the demands were the army was to be more thoroughly reorganized. Army should be modernized. A host of area were identified for reform, like monetary, like banking and postal system. Next, government encouragement of private industry and commerce. Next, the construction of schools and library. Next, changes in examination system. These type of changes they wanted to require in that. Next is the principal theorist. Kang Yue, Hong Zui, they were the theorists of that particular time. In 1881 to 1879, in 1881 and 1879, he visited Shanghai and Hong Kong. Who? Kang Yue. His ideas were set out in two major works. Number one, study of classic thoughts during the Zen period. Number two, Confucius as a reformer. King's contribution, however, lay in his ability to place the demands of reform within the Chinese tradition itself. In many respects, Kang was no different from the leaders of Yang Wu movement, Yang Fu and Tan Sitong. He was also the reformer of that particular time. He was more directly condemned not only the conservatism of ruling class, the Confucian moral codes, but more significantly the Manchu domination of Chinese. Next is escadency, the scope of reform, the 100 days reform, that is very important. The 100 days reform. The name derived from the fact that the reform derived lasted about 103 days between June 11 to September 16 of 1898. Khan and his associates were summoned to Peking to help in program. Khan was appointed as secretary of Zhongli, Yemen. The scope of reform. Offices were created to introduce a modern legal system. Agriculture, industry, trade, ministries were created to supervise them. Plans were made to regulate provincial economies and to start chambers of commerce. These type of reforms they were following at that time. And the reaction of the people of that particular area. There were several contradictions within the reform effort itself, and the reformers focused exclusively on the elite ruling classes of China. The proposed political reforms themselves would have continued to serve the interest of the ruling elites. Agriculture, mainstay of society, received no attention. The reformers avowed resistance of foreign encroachment seemed to contradict the westernization they advocated. But at the same time, we have to appreciate that the prime concern of reformists was to initiate such measures that would check imperialist aggression. Moreover, the reformists did strike at the feudal system and ideology. And at last, in Unit 5 and Unit 6, we have studied a lot of things. First phase and second phase of the period, they were reforming at that time. And what was the impact of their reformation at that time in China? We have studied a lot of things related to all these things. So, thank you and have a nice day.